This is Gene Lance on the Workers Beat Extra. Today, I'm talking to Dan McCrory, who's got a new book. What's your book about, Dan?
It's called Capitalism Killed the Middle Class, 25 Ways the System is Rigged Against You. And what it is part memoir, because I was a CWA local president, communication workers. And I also put a little look into the future with things like the universal basic income, the gig economy, and things like that. And I also looked at our history as far as whether or not we're ever going to get a labor party and topics like that.
You think we might get a labor party? That actually comes up in your book?
Yes, it does. And it talks about 4 times that it was attempted, going back as far as 1894. And Samuel Gompers put the kibosh on it at that time.
Samuel Gompers, of course, was the head of the AFL when it started.
Exactly.
And so he didn't want a workers' party. He wanted.
Well, we were going through a major recession at the time. It was actually a rolling dual recession, almost our first depression. And he looked around and he saw people hurting and jobs going by the wayside. And he said, "This is not a good time for a labor party."
Yeah, but he was president of the AFL for decades, and he still didn't start a workers' party.
Exactly.
So the idea wasn't too popular with him. You know, I'm still kind of getting over the fact that you use the word capitalism in the book, because not so long ago, nobody ever said the word capitalism. Nobody said socialism. I mean, socialism would be like the last word you would say. But even capitalism was, nobody ever acknowledged that the economic system in the United States was capitalism. They always called it freedom.
Or democracy.
Or democracy, which is not even an economic system.
Exactly.
But in fact, but you're putting yourself kind of on the cutting edge here by throwing out the word capitalism, and I infer from the title that you're not too crazy about it.
I think a lot of people, if you look at all the homeless on the streets and things like that, they would agree with me that capitalism isn't working for everybody. So I think that if some changes, drastic changes are made, where maybe labor comes into its own again, and we have a system that allows for negotiation at the highest level with wages and working conditions, that maybe the labor movement can be the savior of the middle class.
So the labor movement is what you're hoping for, is going to pull us out of all this.
Exactly.
Would that include the environmental crisis? Because I know that labor's got some good positions on the environmental crisis, but frankly, I don't really see them doing all that much.
Well, I talked to some labor friends in Switzerland, of all places, the International Labor Union that exists there, International Labor Organization, the ILO. And they told me that what they did was they put something on the table with governments in Europe that said workers are the first that are affected by bad environment. And if you give them the jobs to clean it up, they're the best people to clean it up. So that actually created jobs in the environmental sector, so to speak.
So it's working in Europe.
Yes.
And you have hopes for it working here, that the labor movement will actually be the way to solve the environmental crisis. What about racial justice? That's an issue for all of us that's really come to a peak in this past summer, or a new peak, I should say. And do you think the unions have a solution for that?
Well, Walter Reuther, the head of the UAW way back when, walked alongside Martin Luther King in the march in Selma. And I think a lot of us are going to be on the right side of history on this one. And I do think that all our brothers and sisters together can do something about this. So yes, I think the labor movement can play a major role in getting rid of systemic racism.
Have you been around the labor movement a long time?
Over 40 years.
Over 40 years. So that would take us back to what, the 1970s, 1980s?
Yes, yes. 1973 is when I first became a union member.
Hmm. Because up before 1995, unions didn't have such a great reputation in the progressive movement. You
That's true.
said 1973. That was right before the very last part of the Vietnam War. And for the most part, you may recall, the AFL-CIO supported that war against the youth of America.
Well, there are a lot of lies being told back then. You may remember General Westmoreland was said we were winning the war in Vietnam, and he told Nixon that, and Nixon believed him, and a lot of Americans believed him, and it turned out not to be true. And eventually, the tide turned, and everybody saw that that we were fighting a losing battle in Vietnam because they saw us as invaders rather than their northern Vietnamese kin.
Dr. Martin Luther King helped people come to that realization.
Exactly. And
Uh,
when he was shot, he was fighting for sanitation workers in Memphis.
mhm. The AFL-CIO of today is quite a bit different from the AFL-CIO prior to 1995. And and because of that, there are people like you who consider the AFL-CIO or the labor movement in general to be the very core of the progressive movement. But there are still people who don't think so. There are people who still see the AFL-CIO as part of the establishment. And these are the same people who see the Democratic Party as not being uh, a positive force. So you're saying, though, that a workers' party could come about, and that if it did come about, it would be the unions that started it, or it would be based on the unions, I guess, right?
Yes, sir. What I envision is that the labor movement go through a look at themselves because I actually did a webinar a couple of months ago where I asked three questions: what does the labor movement do right? What do they do wrong? And what do we need to change to survive and even thrive? And I had lots of guest speakers, and all of them agreed that the change needs to come from the bottom up.
So the union members need to get active and start demanding the very best from the union movement as a whole.
Exactly.
You see that as happening?
Uh, Nobody likes to change. I know that, and I know plenty of labor leaders in a lot of different unions that would fight that tooth and nail. But the inevitable situation requires us to take a look at ourselves and change so that we adapt and are able to draw new union members and also look at the changing scene as far as uh, jobs that are out there. For instance, my new union, which is a National Writers Union, which until recently was a part of the UAW, we were going to magazines, pro-union magazines like In These Times and others like that, saying you need to have an agreement for freelancers so that they can have equitable pay and things like that. And we've been very successful. And that's thinking outside the box. And I think a lot of labor unions are starting to do that now and going after groups that haven't traditionally been union. But when you talk to millennials, they see the union movement as a no-brainer. They think it's inevitable that people join the labor union.
So the millennials, you're saying, are very positive toward the union movement. Well,
Very
you'll be very happy to know, since you mentioned the writers union, which was associated with the auto workers not so long ago, that there's now a writers guild, which is associated with your union, CWA, and
right.
they recently organized the journalists of the Dallas Morning News, where I am, and also of the Fort Worth Star Telegram, which is near Dallas. So the Writers Guild, CWA, has got some new members coming in who are journalists in the North Texas area. I guess you're pretty proud of
Actually,
that.
that used to be the newspaper guild. I think they're actually called the News Guild, if I
Oh,
remember correctly. But I also used to be a part of that organization, even though I was already paying dues to CWA. I decided to give them 2 times my amount of money by I did the newsletter for the LA County Federation of Labor, which was all the unions here in LA. And so I had to join that as part of my job responsibilities at the LA County Federation of Labor.
There's a lot of controversy right now concerning journalism, because for some time now, there's been a movement underway to undermine the truth and to say that journalists are all liars, that everything is fake news, and that if it doesn't fit into a certain pattern, that a preconceived pattern, then it's not true. And so consequently, journalists have been very much under fire and have even been called the enemy of the people. Do you
I
see
know,
that as changing?
definitely, because anything that he called fake news was anything that was negative towards him. So it was real easy to find out what he would declare fake news. I interviewed the head of the International Federation of Journalists a couple of years ago, and he was very wary of where we were going with the term fake news, because he saw it as undermining the standard bearer of great journalism, which is the United States. And hopefully it will be again soon.
Hmm. Well, tell us how does your book, or can you suggest in just a few minutes, how does your book see resolution? How does your book see things coming out better than they are now?
Well, it's funny you should say that. My last chapter is called Evolution or Revolution. And one's going to be very painful, and the other one is going to it shows an evolving consciousness by the citizens of this country and by all the people that are taking a look at where they stand on issues. And I hope that the answer is going to be evolution, but there's going to be some pain involved too, I'm afraid. So it might be a mixture of both. But I tried to draw a jagged line to from the things that we went through before, such as the 1894 loss of a Labor Party, through FDR's championing the labor cause, even though he was the richest man that ever ran for office before Mr. Trump. And I tried to show how everything leads to the conclusion that we need to take matters into our own hands, because for a long time now, the middle class has not had any say so in Washington or in a lot of state capitals either.
So, so you think that we will evolve then into into some kind of better society? Will it still be capitalism, or would it be socialism or something else?
Well, I'd like to see what they have in Sweden and Denmark and those places.
Mhm.
And they don't like it when we call it this, but it is social democracy. It's and social democracy simply means thinking of the regular man or woman on the street rather than people at the towers of power. If we concentrate on what we need, what the middle class needs, let's face it, the only taxes that are being paid these days are people like us, because the poor can't afford it, and the rich find all sorts of ways to get out of paying taxes. So that puts the monkey in our back.
So
And
you,
if
by the people like us, you mean people in the middle income brackets?
you got it,
Hmm.
and I think we deserve some respect and some dignity for that. And so we should see laws centered around things that are going to ease our uh, passage, I guess. One of the things I'd like to see is infrastructure. Infrastructure falls right into the lap of labor responsibility. So we are the ones to rebuild the bridges and the roads of this country.
What trends do you see that give you this optimistic view? What things that are going on make you more optimistic about the future?
Because of my conversations with millennials, and that my book is actually targeted towards them, as well as old salts like yourself and me, who want to see what's happening out there in the real world. And millennials, at first I thought they were just going to be snowflakes, but they really feel for the issues, and they have a keen grasp of what needs to happen in this country to make things better for everyone. And I believe me, I I gained renewed hope every time I talk to a millennial.
Because they're growing consciousness, you're saying that the younger people have a growing consciousness that will assert itself and make a better world as they tend to take over. I guess the older folks will just be dying off and the millennials will take over.
Well, I see part of our job as sort of directing them and making sure they don't get off track. Right after the 2016 elections, I tried starting a club with all the millennials that I had met, and it died under its own weight because they were writing rules for the club that were very exclusionary rather than inclusive,
Mm.
and that's where it went wrong. And what they have to realize is that they need to persuade people, the neoliberals that we know of in the party, to come over to our side to look at things like, for instance, a $15 wage. Hillary said, "Oh, we can only do $12." We need to stop looking at incrementalism, thinking that's the right way to go. We need to have some bold, innovative ideas, and that's the reason why Bernie Sanders was so popular, because he was bold enough to say, "We need this, we need that," and the party actually, even though they poo-pooed at the time, a lot of those things have come to be on the list of things that the Democratic Party believes in.
So you were a Bernie supporter. Were you happy with the way the election turned out?
No, it was not. Well, I mean, as far as Biden getting elected, uh, a lot of people have said I wasn't voting for Joe. I was voting against Donnie. And a lot of my friends felt that way because we had to get rid of him before we could start pushing the party back again to the left.
Hmm. Well, frankly, what I hear from the AFL-CIO today is that they're celebrating the Biden election, and they're looking forward to trying to get some of labor's priorities passed
And
uh,
I'll be,
in the coming months. The
yeah,
big push right now is for the Heroes Act, which will be another big bailout for American businesses that will theoretically provide some jobs and keep people going. And that's the main priority for the AFL-CIO is the Heroes Act. I think right after that comes the PRO Act, which would make it easier to organize unions. And I guess those are things you would be for, right?
yeah. I wasn't too sure that I was in favor of the card check that they had put up for adoption a few years ago, because I saw it as a way for unions to have a lot of infighting and raid each other. And I was worried that they were going to go that route. Hopefully, there are things put in place with this act that won't allow for that or make it much harder for that to happen, because there are unions that are no longer under the wing of the FLCIO that look to grow their numbers, and that's the way they look at growing their numbers. And we got to keep on point on that to make sure that that isn't what happens.
You happen to have a copy of your book nearby? Maybe you can show us your book and tell us how to get it.
Uh,
Capitalism Killed the Middle Class.
yep.
How
It's
do you get
available.
one?
It's available on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and on my website, of course.
And your website is named Dan McCrory?
Yeah, it's called, it's under hosting authors /authors/ Dan McCrory. I know it's a big mouthful, but that way you're not giving
Well, they
money
can
to.
just Google. They can just Google Dan McCrory and
That's true. That's a
find
very
your
good.
book, or they can go to Amazon and put in
Yep.
Capitalism Killed the Middle Class.
And if they mention they're a labor member, I'll be glad to send them a study guide that I've written to go with it.
Okay, that's great. So you're hoping that some of the union people or some of the millennials will not just read the book, but take it to heart.
Exactly. There are some lessons in there that I've had doctors say they didn't know that when they read the healthcare chapter. Some of the things that I put in there. I've had lawyers. I had one lawyer that I met in Thailand from Canada, and he arranged a talking group of former captains of industry. One of these guys was a former Toronto Stock Exchange person. Another one was a former VP from Disney, and we went through my book chapter by chapter, and I opened their eyes somewhat too.
Good. So give us the elevator pitch or the short pitch. Why people should buy your book?
Because you can read a lot of books like this, but you don't see any from that are tales from the trenches, people that have actually lived the things that we're going through. You can get books by people, economists that will tell the same stories, but they weren't there necessarily. And this one hits home. Every chapter has a little bit of me in it, as well as what's going on in the world or what has transpired to get us to where we are.
All right. I'm talking with Dan McCrory about his book, Capitalism Killed the Middle Class. And this is Gene Lance on the Workers Beat Extra.